The alert has already gone out. This is not a drill. It's not a test. It's real, and it's happening right now. Somewhere in a command center, a final decision has been locked in. Across the continental United States, millions of people are reaching for phones, looking out windows, trying to understand what safe means now. And sanctuary is almost certainly not where you think it is. Because before a single visible missile arrives, something else happens first. A detonation high above the continent, not meant to destroy cities, but to erase coordination. You don't hear it, you don't see it. Power drops out across multiple states in less than a second. Phones go dead mid-scroll. Air traffic control screens go blank. Fuel pumps stop mid-transfer. The grid doesn't fail gradually, it disappears. Not everywhere and not evenly, but enough to fracture response before the first impact, and then the warheads follow. The first wave doesn't hit cities. That assumption, crowded skylines dwarfed by mushroom clouds, is wrong. A nuclear first strike is not a punishment. It is math. The targets are the things that can strike back. The ICBM fields across Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota. Entire regions built around the idea that they would never need to defend themselves, only retaliate. They are gone in the opening minutes. Submarine bases in Georgia and Washington state follow. The vessels that guarantee second strike capability can't be allowed to leave port. They're destroyed where they sit. Command and control comes next. Virginia, Colorado, Nebraska. These are not symbolic targets, they're functional ones. And function is what gets erased first. One by one, the structure that makes retaliation possible is taken apart. And by the time cities enter the equation, the decision about where you are has already been made. This is not a question of what gets hit. It is a question of what doesn't. Now, look at what's left. You are standing on Mackinac Bridge, 5 miles of steel and cable, the only road connecting Michigan's Upper Peninsula to the lower half of the state. Behind you, the industrial Midwest sits inside a fallout corridor stretching across multiple states. Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, everything that defined American manufacturing now sits downwind of targets that mattered more. But ahead of you is something else entirely. A forested peninsula surrounded on 3 sides by the largest freshwater system on Earth. The Great Lakes hold roughly 21% of the world's surface freshwater. That means there's no scenario where you run out of water before something else kills you first. For a century, the modern economy skipped this region. Too far from primary shipping lanes, no suburban sprawl, too disconnected from the systems that made everywhere else grow. But today, that lack of development is the reason you are still breathing. Up here, there are no primary military targets, no dense population centers, which means fewer immediate survivors flooding the same space when everything collapses. There's also the cold, and that's actually important. In the right conditions, it becomes a form of protection. The Great Lakes store enormous amounts of heat, and unlike air, water changes temperature slowly. That makes a major difference. In a nuclear winter scenario, atmospheric soot could lower global average surface temperatures by roughly 14.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Inland regions see temperatures drop fast. The seasons become unstable and farming conditions worsen. But the areas near large lakes, they're different. The lakes release stored heat gradually. It doesn't prevent the cold, but it reduces extremes. That creates a more stable climate compared to inland areas. It leads to more consistent growing seasons, even under severe soot conditions. The same lake that once limited economic development becomes a lifeline, literally. In places like the Gulf Coast, commercial fishing fleets need diesel, satellite GPS, and deep-sea equipment to operate. When the grid dies, those boats stay docked. In the Upper Peninsula, fishing is on a human scale. Species that live in the water don't migrate when conditions change. They're always there, always within reach of a small boat and a net. The forests provide the rest. White-tailed deer, small game, foraging all provide a mixed, flexible diet. And that means survival. Not because resources are limited, but because the demand hasn't caught up to them yet. The bridge is the only way in, and the only way out, which means what protects you is already being calculated by 10 million people on the other side. Its advantage only lasts as long as that imbalance holds. Roughly 300,000 people live in the region. In a crisis, Mackinac Bridge becomes a funnel. If even a fraction of Lower Michigan's residents decides to head north, the bridge turns into a choke point. If it clogs, the peninsula absorbs a population it cannot feed. If it gets closed or destroyed, the peninsula survives, but anyone still on the wrong side stays there. And there's a secondary concern most survival maps ignore entirely. The Palisades nuclear plant in southwest Michigan and the Fermi 2 plant near Detroit sit on the shores of the Great Lakes. If those reactors lose cooling in a prolonged grid failure, contamination enters the lake system. The same water that is your lifeline becomes your threat. The Upper Peninsula was always too cold, too remote, and too disconnected to attract sustained investment. Right now, too cold and too remote is the difference between exposure and survival. The sirens have been silent for hours now. While most people are reacting, you are already past the decision point. You're already where you need to be, perhaps in a West Virginia hollow, and you're not moving. The ridgelines above you do something that no engineered system was designed to replicate. They catch the wind. Radioactive particles carried on the wind don't pass cleanly over mountain terrain. They hit the slopes, get forced upward, cool, and drop out of the air. By the time they reach the hollow on the far side, much of it has already fallen away. What settles there is air the mountains have quietly stripped clean. There are no concentrated military installations to justify a first strike allocation, no large population centers to appear in the opening salvo, and the same wind patterns that carry contamination from the eastern corridor push it northeast, away from you. But even here, this only works as long as the system still exists somewhere else. So the question shifts to what happens when it disappears entirely. Across the country, everything grinds to a halt. No water, no food, no communication. In Appalachia, thousands of natural springs push water to the surface through gravity alone. No pumps, no treatment plants, no electricity needed. Water that has spent decades filtering through layers of rock before it ever reaches daylight. While cities lose access to clean water in under 2 days, here the water continues to flow. The knowledge required to survive is ingrained here. In Appalachian communities, off-grid living isn't treated like a project or a backup plan. That's just continuity. Near the Monongahela National Forest, a lot of families still operate with skills that never really disappeared. They weren't rediscovered or turned into hobbies, they were just passed down and kept in use, like food preservation, salt-cured meat, vegetables in glass jars that sit on shelves for years without refrigeration, smoking game over hardwood fires. This isn't a survival skill set, it's a continuation of normal life under different conditions, which removes something most people don't account for: the time it takes to learn under pressure. Salt itself is a strategic asset most people overlook entirely. The Kanawha Valley sits on major salt deposits. J.Q. Dickinson Salt Works has been extracting it from the underground brine for 200 years. Before refrigeration, salt was the difference between having protein and losing it. That equation hasn't changed, just the system around it did. But that's not the only resource in this region. Coal seams run through these mountains as well. They're some of the densest deposits in North America. It won't be used for power plants now, but for heating, cooking, and basic survival when every other energy source disappears. But Appalachia has a limit, one that generational knowledge can't fix. The same terrain that filters fallout also isolates communities from each other. 10 miles in a straight line becomes 40 miles by road, if the road is even passable. Without fuel, without communication, without coordination, each commune becomes its own system, self-contained. And if your sanctuary lacks something, salt, water, or people with the right knowledge, you're trapped behind a ridge with no way to reach the one that does. The mountains protect you, and they cut you off. They control movement in and out whether you want them to or not. And the mountains don't play favorites. They give the same air to everyone. The difference? The family that never left already knows which spring is safe and which one isn't. And Appalachia was already living on the other side of it. But if separation from the system is an advantage, pushing that separation even further starts to change the rules entirely. There are 100 miles of nothing between you and the nearest primary target. Not metaphorical distance, actual distance. Now you're standing at the edge of the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness in central Idaho, a mountain terrain so rugged that even the U.S. Army struggled to cross it. Even today, parts of it are still effectively unreachable on foot. It is so vast you could walk for weeks without crossing a road. That isolation now becomes a buffer. Radioactive fallout weakens the further it gets from the blast point. Particles decay, they disperse, and they lose density. By the time they reach deep into mountain terrain, what was lethal closer to the source becomes survivable. And that's enough. The Rocky Mountain canyons are steep and narrow. If you're at the bottom of a gorge near the Salmon River, you're living in a pocket of earth cut off from the sky above. Heavy fallout particles settle on peaks and stay there. The valley air is clean. The terrain takes the fallout for you. But not all of the Rockies survive equally. Colorado has a number of primary targets. NORAD inside Cheyenne Mountain, Peterson Space Force Base outside Colorado Springs. These coordinates are not optional in a strike plan. The difference between survival and exposure is measured in miles from those points. Central Idaho sits outside that radius. It's 300 miles from the nearest strategic installation, and that's far enough to matter. The food here doesn't rely on infrastructure. Animals that have survived without human systems for thousands of years. Water comes from snowmelt in mountain streams, fed by gravity and filtered as it moves downstream. Any infrastructure collapse will barely register here. There are no systems to fail in the first place. But distance is a shield that works only as long as you can sustain it. The Frank Church Wilderness is called the River of No Return for a reason. If your food runs low, if someone needs medical attention, there is no cavalry coming to the rescue. No resupply, no helicopter evacuation. Those 100 miles of nothing that protect you also prevent anyone from reaching you. And if the nuclear winter modeling is right about temperature drops, the already brutal Idaho winters get worse. Snowpack that normally melts by June might persist into July or August. The growing seasons shrink into a small window. Wildlife populations are not infinite. Overhunting by desperate survivors will cause numbers to dwindle. Distance saves your life and then dares you to keep it. Every place so far has been a different answer to the same impossible question. Where do people still manage to eat, move, and hold together when the rest of the map has already failed? The Rockies were never designed as a fortress. They just function like one. But they're still tied up to the same landmass and everything happening across it. Fallout, weather shifts, collapse, it all carries. So the next step is pretty simple. Leave the continent entirely. Puerto Rico sits 1,000 miles from the continental United States. It's far enough out that nothing is aimed this way. No sirens, no drills, just the usual sounds of life carrying on. It's the kind of place where a distant crisis feels exactly that. The ocean itself is the first layer of defense. Water does not just create distance, it interrupts fallout movement. Air reaching the island travels across thousands of miles of ocean. Not across burning cities or destroyed infrastructure, it arrives cleaner. Trade winds push consistently from east to west. It's air that hasn't touched the mainland. Life doesn't stop. Just barely. In the Cordillera Central, people still pull food from the ground. Coffee, plantains, breadfruit, roots that survive because they're buried. The harvest shrinks season after season, but it doesn't vanish. There's just less. Always less every year. On the mainland, the choice is easy. Food or no food. Here, the line blurs a little bit. You eat, but not enough. Puerto Rico is close to the equator, where baseline solar radiation is the highest on the planet. Even under heavy atmospheric soot conditions, there's still enough sunlight reaching the surface to sustain limited agriculture. Not enough to feel safe, but just enough to keep things alive a little longer. On the mainland, nuclear winter is the difference between eating and starving. Puerto Rico has already experienced large-scale grid loss. After Hurricane Maria in 2017, much of the island lived without power for months. The infrastructure collapsed. The communities didn't, though. Villages in the mountains were rebuilt without waiting for federal help. They already know how to fix things, how to share resources, and survive when the system fails. That knowledge is still here. It helps, but it doesn't solve what's coming. Because the island does not stay empty. It's visible. It's reachable. Everyone with a map and a plane ticket can figure out the same thing you did. The island has 3.2 million people on it already. If even a small percentage of East Coast residents fly south before airports close, the population can spike by hundreds of thousands in days. More mouths, same amount of farmland. Same amount of fresh water. Puerto Rico currently imports around 85% of its food. The land can produce more, but at the moment it's not producing enough. The potential is real, but the current capacity is not. And the gap between those two numbers is measured in lives. The island works, but only if it's not overwhelmed. Because once population rises faster than production, distance stops being protection. So the equation changes again. Not bigger, not farther, but smaller. 65 miles to the south, there's a smaller dot on the map. And being a dot is the entire point. Everywhere else is gone. Cities reduced to rubble. Coastlines burned into maps. The systems that used to hold everything together have collapsed. And in the middle of that wider failure, there's still this. St. Croix. It barely registers on a strategic map. Too isolated, too low value to justify a strike. The island is small enough to be ignored. Most homes rely on cisterns, underground reservoirs that collect and store rainwater. If water pipes break or pumps stop, it does not matter. Every home has its own private water supply sitting under the floorboards. All you need is a bucket. Islanders keep small fish in the cisterns to eat mosquito larvae and keep water clean. The reefs around St. Croix still hold fish, but only as long as nothing pushes them past their limit. If fishing turns from survival to panic, the water's empty fast, and there's nowhere else to turn. Supply ships don't arrive on schedule. They arrive when they can, and sometimes not at all. What's left in the water is something that disappears the moment pressure rises. People here already live in that margin where sharing works only until it doesn't. The existing population is roughly 41,000. A cistern system that works beautifully for 41,000 people starts to fail at 60,000. Fishing waters that restock naturally can be overfished, and unlike the mainland locations, there is no second option. On St. Croix, you can't walk to the next valley or drive to the next town. You're on a rock in the ocean. If the fish run out, if the cisterns go dry, if the population surges, there is nowhere left to go. The same smallness that keeps you off the targeting map limits how many people can survive there. So if making the target smaller creates a ceiling, the strategy has to change again. Not smaller, not farther, not bigger, just protected. On the mainland, there is a place that doesn't seem like an obvious survival location. The Ozark Plateau. It has no dramatic peaks, no obvious geographic drama, just rolling hills across southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. And that is exactly why it works. It was never important enough to target. Too far west to absorb East Coast fallout patterns, too far south to take the full impact of northern targets. Position matters, even when it looks unremarkable. But underground, it's anything but ordinary. Under the rolling hills sits one of the most extensive cave systems in North America. Thousands of them, carved from limestone over millions of years. Merrimack Caverns in Missouri stretches for miles. It provides protection from everything happening above ground. There are literally hundreds of feet of limestone between you and the outside world. It's a natural bunker that no amount of money can replicate and no weapon can reach. Agriculture here was never fully industrialized. It remains divided into small family plots. Cattle eat grass that grows naturally. Gardens are watered by underground springs. Crops vary by plot. Game roams the land. If one food source fails, something else grows. The Ozarks don't have the efficiency of a Midwest cornfield, but they do have redundancy, and that's the only agricultural strategy that survives. The caves don't care what happens above ground or how far the fallout traveled. It doesn't care about which cities are gone. They have been standing for 1 million years, and they will be standing for 1 million more. That constant is the rarest thing left in the world right now. But that isolation cuts both ways. Medical care does not exist at scale here. Hospitals are distant. The nearest trauma center might be in Springfield or Little Rock, both of which are dealing with their own collapse. If someone in your group gets an infection or breaks a bone, you're looking at 19th century outcomes with 19th century odds. Survival here depends less on what exists underground and more on how many people know about it above ground. The region was invisible before the bombs fell, and it remains invisible now. The bombs have stopped, fallout has settled, but you've made it. You're alive. And now, the real problem begins. A Penn State study published in 2025 looked at what nuclear war would do to global agriculture by modeling corn production across tens of thousands of locations under multiple scenarios. In the worst case, where soot floods the stratosphere and blocks sunlight, crop production doesn't decline but collapses. Most of the world's corn output falls away, leaving only a fraction of what systems are built to rely on. And then there's a second layer people often miss. The atmosphere doesn't recover easily. Chemical reactions from the detonations shred the ozone layer. That means more UV radiation reaches the surface years after the bombing stops. That quietly continues to affect crops long after the initial cooling has set in. It's the end of industrial agriculture as a functioning system. For years, maybe more than a decade, and famine is only the beginning. Water systems fail in most populated areas within days. Sanitation collapses. Diseases follow. Diseases that modern America has not seen in a century. Cholera doesn't announce itself. It moves through water, through contact, through the invisible gap between a clean source and a contaminated one. In a community that hasn't seen it in a century, there are no protocols and no instinct for what to do when the first person gets sick. In the 1991 Gulf War, Iraq's infrastructure was heavily damaged, including part of its water and sanitation system. What followed was public health breakdown. Outbreaks of diseases spread, with some estimates placing the health-related death toll in the hundreds of thousands. And that happened in a single country, with aid still moving and organizations still able to respond. In a global nuclear exchange, that disappears. There's no international aid pipeline, no coordinated response, no airlift from functioning regions. Even institutions like the World Health Organization will be operating in a fractured system. At that point, survival stops being about access to global systems and starts being about what exists locally. A human body needs roughly 2,000 calories a day. Where do those calories come from when every truck has stopped, every store has been emptied, and every field is dead? The real killer is the years that follow. Some places might buy you time, but even that time is measured in thin margins. One bad harvest, one overwhelmed hollow, one overfished reef, and the clock runs out. That is not a coincidence. That's natural selection at that point. And it matches almost exactly the map of places America decided were not worth investing in. The same decisions that kept investment out, that kept infrastructure thin, that kept populations small and economies disconnected, those decisions are the reason anyone survives at all. The neglect that looked like failure from the outside turns out to have been insulation. The Map of American Economic Abandonment and the Map of American Survival after nuclear war are not just similar, they're identical. The places nobody wanted are the only places left, and the people who were already there end up inheriting the advantage without ever framing it that way. The map has been telling the same story for decades. The only question is whether anyone will read it. Because the last normal moment you had, before the alert, before the silence, was the only time you could have chosen differently. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.